I was 12 and at school when the teacher came to the classroom and told us that a war started between Finland and Russia, and the school will be closed from now on.
A whole Soviet division ventured into the frozen tundra of eastern Finland in the depths of winter 1939, equipped to the teeth and sure of triumph. After a few days, they had vanished, not vanquished in combat, lost forever. The aftermath revealed unexplained phenomena to the Finnish troops. Motionless bodies frozen in mid-motion, interiors burnt but unburned, and an inaudible hum. In official reports, the details were omitted. Those who managed to escape just disappeared. Amidst the stillness, a presence awaited. Not only is this a battle narrative, but it is also an incomplete and sealed historical document. When it came to the 44th Rifle Division and Rate Road, what happened? Underneath the snow, maybe, rather than in it, lies the solution. Joseph Stalin invaded Finland in late 1939 under the pretext of protecting the northwest frontier of the Soviet Union. Stalin was deeply worried about the closeness of Leningrad to possible hostile Western nations, as it was only 32 kilometers from the Finnish border. It was a major concern for the Soviet leadership that Finland may provide an opening for an assault on one of the Soviet Union's most strategic cities in the event of a confrontation with Germany or the West. Stalin wanted Finland to give up territory in order to appease this imagined danger. The Soviet Union chose to use force when talks broke down, starting the Winter War. Hard power was key to the Russian government's military strategy. Finland was severely outnumbered and ill-equipped in comparison to the Soviet military, leading Stalin and his generals to fear that the country would crumble under the overwhelming force of the Red Army. In a few weeks, the Soviet Union sent out a massive air force, numbers of tanks, and more than 400,000 soldiers in an effort to subdue the Finns. The results of this arrogance were catastrophic. The freezing tundra of Finland was no match for the Soviet military machine, which was intended for massive conventional battles. Soviet strategists were so focused on achieving a quick and unambiguous triumph that they failed to account for the difficulties presented by the landscape, the weather, and the strategic brilliance of the Finns. Stalin greatly underestimated the nature of the Finnish defense. Despite its numerous flaws, the small but highly motivated and disciplined Finnish army was well acquainted with the brutal winter climate. A national cause was born out of the invasion as the civilian populace rallied behind their soldiers. Because most Finns had fought in previous regional battles, they knew the terrain well and could utilize that knowledge to their advantage. The war that the Soviets had hoped would be brief became a protracted and agonizing nightmare, as whole Soviet divisions were either trapped, wounded, or destroyed by the more agile and little Finnish forces. Stalin made a number of strategic and tactical mistakes, including a failure to grasp the wider diplomatic implications of invading a neutral nation. Having maintained its independence since 1917, Finland was no longer a part of any geopolitical grouping. As a result of their attack, the Soviet Union was censured and even kicked out of the League of Nations. Aside from destroying the Soviet Union's reputation, this sent a resounding message to smaller nations about the extent of the Soviet Union's intentions. Despite reclaiming some land in Finland, the loss of life, equipment, and prestige caused by the Soviet Union's actions greatly exceeded Stalin's expectations. Something far colder and less tolerant was already destroying the Soviet war machine from the inside before even a single Finnish bullet had flown through the air. The harsh Finnish Arctic environment soon proved to be an insurmountable barrier to the Soviet invasion. Though they were ready to face an organized military force, Soviet generals were completely unprepared for the destructive might of nature. Much of the Soviet mechanical advantage was made worthless by the Finnish landscape, which consisted of thick boreal woods, frozen lakes, and snow-choked highways. Due to the impassability of the roads and the thick snow, tanks and trucks were unable to provide adequate support to the troops. Entire regiments might be hungry, thirsty, or without ammunition when supply lines, which were already weak and poorly maintained, broke under the strain of weather-related impediments. Because they weren't ready for winter fighting, the Soviet army made matters worse. The flimsy uniforms given to the majority of Soviet soldiers were not enough to withstand the sub-zero temperatures, which dropped as low as 40 degcc. Deaths were being claimed by frostbite, cold, and malnutrition even before hostilities escalated. The Finns had evolved their military strategy to deal with the Arctic environment over many generations, while the Soviets lacked the proper education and training to do the same. The decreased operational efficacy and morale caused by the freezing temperatures made them easy prey for the smaller Finnish forces, who took advantage of their weakness. Soldiers' minds were also impacted by environmental circumstances, as were the bewildered Soviet forces. Sound was muted, and visibility was practically impossible by the relentless, heavy snow. The dense pine trees served as an acoustic echo chamber, enabling the Finnish guerrilla groups to launch covert attacks and then flee the scene. Due to their lack of experience with sensory isolation, Soviet fighters frequently complained that they were unable to identify enemy locations or locate their own units until it was too late. Because of the cold, broken radios, and the fact that couriers went lost or injured in the weather, divisions were unable to communicate with one another. The Soviet attack looked to be beset by every possible enemy, even the weather. A sudden whiteout engulfed vast regions, wiping out all trace of roads or landmarks. As a result, troops were cut off from headquarters for days. Decisions made by command were more disorganized than in the past. Before long, Moscow's orders were either unimportant or impossible to carry out in the allotted time. The inability to adjust to the climate's vicissitudes was a result of the Soviet High Command's detachment and remoteness. Battlefield dynamics shifted from a mere clash of troops to a brutal showdown with Mother Nature, a challenge that the Red Army was woefully unprepared to handle. The Soviet 44th Rifle Division was sent to aid the beleaguered 163rd Rifle Division in early January 1940, during the height of the Winter War. The division was besieged by Finnish troops near the village of Suomussalmi, often spelt Suomisalmi. This was a vital target. The 163rd Division was encircled by nimble Finnish soldiers using ambush tactics after it had gone too far into Finnish territory. In the eyes of the Soviet leadership, a new, better-equipped division could reclaim the front, free the trapped soldiers, and end the encirclement. There were a lot of vehicles and about 17,000 men in the 44th Rifle Division. There were also tanks and artillery batteries. It looked scary on paper. Columns of the division advanced confidently up Rate Road, a lonely, snow-covered trail that winds its way through thick woods. The Soviets were planning to quickly complete their task by sweeping past Finnish opposition with the help of their armored vehicles and air assistance. Nevertheless, when confronted with unfamiliar terrain and methods, this assumption revealed its hazardous naivete, because to its narrowness, lack of pavement, and proximity to dense trees, Rate Road became an impassable nightmare for the advanced division. As they moved at a snail's pace, vehicles became easy prey for barricades and explosives. When tanks became caught in snowdrifts, the thick canopy rendered them ineffective and rendered them unusable. Both visibility and communication were significantly hindered. The deeper the column progressed into Finnish territory, the more exposed and strung out it became, making it an easy target for the guerrilla operations carried out by Finland. The 44th Division advanced due to Soviet arrogance and faulty information, which led to their dismissal of their Finnish adversaries. The truth was that the Soviet leadership had grossly misjudged the defenders' strength and determination, thinking of them more as ill-equipped irregulars than experienced winter combatants. the advance into the woodland was ill-planned and unprepared, both logistically and mentally, due to a lack of reconnaissance and inadequate flanking protection. Instead of a rescue, the Soviet advance to Suomussalmi would conclude with a humiliating loss due to haste and poor decision-making. A master of unconventional warfare, the Finnish military fought the Soviet invasion by making use of the terrain as a weapon and a shield. Their Motti warfare was highly effective because it divided huge enemy formations into smaller, more manageable pieces that could be assaulted and killed individually. This tactic worked particularly well when applied to the lengthy and defenseless Soviet columns that were trying to traverse Rajatie Road and other small woodland routes. Finnish soldiers severed supply lines and communication between the enclaves after segmenting a Soviet column, leaving stranded Soviet troops unprotected, bewildered, and undersupplied. An integral part of these strategies was the use of expert ski troopers from Finland. These warriors were expertly prepared and knew their way around snowy landscapes. They advanced stealthily through thick forests and across frozen lakes. Before the enemy could react, ski troopers carried out quick attacks on Soviet encampments and supply vehicles before vanishing into the forest. Because of their stealth and speed, they were able to outmaneuver the Soviet forces that were weighed down by vehicles that weren't working. The psychological toll of these unexpected, spectral strikes was high, and they contributed to the general disorientation felt by Soviet forces. Psychological warfare was an integral part of ambushes, which were more than just tactical operations. Attacks by the Finns were timed to cause the greatest amount of panic and confusion. By making use of the icy gullies, rocky outcrops, and pine trees as cover, the Finnish forces were able to ambush Soviet troops from all angles without exposing themselves. In addition to having limited vision and communication, the Soviets frequently panicked during these ambushes, thinking the tiny Finnish units were part of a bigger force. Morale plummeted, and unit cohesiveness deteriorated due in large part to the unseen threat that appeared capable of observing, pursuing, and encircling them. Countering these guerrilla tactics was mostly unsuccessful for the Red Army. The Soviet Union's out-of-date or inaccurate maps sent forces farther into uncharted territory, compounding the problems of their immobility, lack of topographical knowledge, and inappropriate winter attire. By utilizing concealed escape routes, covering their footprints in snowstorms, or just disappearing into the forest after striking, Finnish forces made the most of every chance. The Soviet soldiers were confused because the enemy seemed to come and go as quickly as a thought, an invisible but ever-present threat. Unusual communication and command structure problems started to show as the 44th Rifle Division advanced farther into Finnish territory along Rajatie Road. Reportedly, whole units abruptly stopped communicating over radio. No matter how close units were, attempts to re-establish communication frequently failed. There was little indication of engagement or distress, and command stations received sporadic reports that units had just ceased responding. Several times, when ordered to check these silences, reinforcements discovered either deserted positions or soldiers who were unresponsive, seeming confused, yet holding their radios in their hands. A more fundamental disturbance, not explicable by changes in geography, weather, or enemy fire, seems to have precipitated this sudden breakdown of coordination. Adding to the worry were reports of Soviet squads discovered in unusually still states, perhaps caught in the middle of an operation rather than cold. Some of them were found standing tall, with their weapons drawn and their eyes fixed on the forest below. Around long extinguished campfires, some sat still. Neither hypothermia nor outward symptoms of damage were seen in these males. There was no sign of panic, struggle, or last-ditch attempt, which goes against the grain of what is typically expected of battle victims. On the contrary, it seemed as though time had stood still, as if something had interrupted their flow. The discovery of the corpses of the officers in their tents was just as unsettling, with their twisted bodies twisted into strange postures like bending over maps or squatting over tables, their expressions showing signs of either terror or bewilderment. Despite the lack of visible injuries, the bodies exhibited rigidity, with joints frozen and eyes wide open. The rigidity and strange postures were not explained by rigor mortis alone, according to the Finnish doctors. The scenes provided evidence of a changed physiological phenomena or an outside force that struck suddenly and with eerie accuracy, obliterating all evidence of its existence. These findings went beyond what was previously known about medical and combat phenomena, even if frostbite and psychological exhaustion were genuine threats. An agency outside nature and tactical design was implicated by the situational collapse, the unexplained quiet of whole squads, and the abnormal post-mortem circumstances. It was as if the power that had non-violently broken their bodies lingered in the woods, listening, watching, and gradually strengthening its hold. As the 44th Rifle Division pushed farther into the forest at Suomussalmi, troops started to describe unexplained occurrences along the tree line. These included shadowy figures who moved silently and were never more than a few feet away. None of these figurines belonged to any known Finnish troops, and they certainly weren't acting like real soldiers. Speculation has it that the forms would emerge momentarily through the snow, disappear without a trace, and then reappear. The impressions left on the soldiers were profound, not only unexplainable but profoundly unnerving, giving them the feeling that something strange was following them. In addition to visual abnormalities, several Soviet troops reported hearing strange noises, including whispering that could not be identified, sounds of movement that did not include footfall, and cracking sounds resembling branches breaking under stress. In awakening, the troops who had shot into the night in the assumption that they were encircled discovered nothing. Some even reported hearing muted people yelling in Russian or Finnish, but no one could determine where those voices were coming from. Eventually, these perceptual encounters contributed to tales of hallucinations caused not by environmental factors like stress or cold, but by an unseen entity deep inside the forest, one that could subtly alter one's perceptions. A low-frequency hum that reverberated through the snow and into the bodies of the troops was the most common occurrence. It gave them headaches, nausea, and confusion. Efforts to pinpoint its origin revealed that it remained constant regardless of direction or vicinity. The soldiers thought it sounded like faraway engines or generators, although there wasn't any local apparatus. Anxieties over it never went away. A number of troops began to suspect that they were up against something more ancient and enigmatic lurking in the forest, rather than just a band of Finnish guerrillas. This entity would not conform to the norms of traditional combat, but would instead manipulate perceptions and undermine soldiers' sanity. A systematic fear developed, not of ambushes or gunshots, but of an unseen enemy that did not fight or hide, but instead only waited and watched. Demoralization was an indelible mark of loss here, as troops encountered a new and unfamiliar concept of battle. Midway through January 1940, when the Finns managed to take Rate Road, they found a level of destruction that went against all the odds. In a state of seeming terror and abrupt collapse, the lifeless remains of thousands of Soviet troops from the 44th Rifle Division lay scattered across the snow-covered terrain. As if suddenly knocked down by an invisible power, some stood still in mid-step, their limbs rigid and their faces contorted in terror or bewilderment. Cradling guns they had never fired, others lay in clusters. Rather than extended gun battles, the arrangement and layout of the bodies suggested a cataclysmic incident that left no time to escape or fight. Some bodies showed indications of serious internal damage without any visible wounds, which was one of the most alarming findings. A number of troops showed signs of internal heat burns to various organs, yet their clothes were unaffected. This finding ruled out the possibility of a traditional method of treating burns sustained in battle, and instead pointed to a strong heat source that penetrated deep into the body. Explosives, environmental factors, or conventional weaponry could not be the cause of these impacts. The discovery of Soviet equipment debris further perplexed everyone. There was no sign of shrapnel or shell hits in several vehicles, including tank interiors and trucks, which had charred or melted surfaces. Even though the drivers were no longer alive, the engines were still warm to the touch. By destroying certain equipment while leaving others undamaged, the Finns were left to wonder what kind of power was responsible for this selective destruction. On the battlefield, an unusual odor persisted, clinging to debris, wafting through trees, and surviving the frigid air that muted other aromas. It was harsh and metallic, like the smell of burning copper or electrical discharge. This smell didn't seem to have any connection to the battle, unlike the usual suspects. After being exposed for lengthy periods of time, Finnish soldiers reported feeling nauseous or lightheaded, as if the air had an electric charge. A complicated environment and the possibility of devastation were left behind by whatever happened along Rate Road, surpassing the scope of any military action. Strange occurrences beyond the mayhem of battle were seen by the Finnish soldiers as they pushed through the aftermath. Isolated boot prints in the snow were a common occurrence. These deep imprints started boldly in one direction before disappearing suddenly and without a trace. The footprints would occasionally come to a halt at the edge of a clearing, then resume a few meters further, avoiding any untracked snow. Especially unnerving were the patterns that led into thick forests and then ended as if the person had been lifted mid-step or swallowed by the trees. Information about bodies that went missing was just as peculiar. Finnish medics and troops clearing the battlefield found weapons and equipment in locations suggesting Soviet activity not long before, but no bodies. Upon returning to their original locations, numerous witnesses reported seeing dead troops, but later discovered no evidence of scavengers or other environmental disturbances. Whatever washed the bodies away apparently didn't leave any footprints in the snow. Worries about practicalities aside, the fact that these disappearances seemed to point to an invisible, maybe intelligent entity at work in the forest simply added gasoline to the fire. Findings from doctors' notes of a peculiar change in the blood of several dead troops were the most unconventional. A black, glassy substance, sharp, brittle, and virtually reflecting, like obsidian, had crystallized from the blood instead of coagulating or freezing. Medical professionals were baffled by the occurrence, and field experiments failed to replicate it. The recovery crew's best guess was that some sort of chemical or energy weapon employed on the battlefield was responsible for the unusual material. Among an effort to maintain morale among the troops and calm the people, the Finnish government recorded these strange occurrences at first, but quickly stopped looking into them. Authorities shut off the area and barred journalists from entering. There were others on the recovery teams who thought the true reason people were keeping quiet was for strategic reasons, such how the results may mess with people's perceptions of what happened. Closed doors were used to regulate whatever occurred along Rate Road. Quick action by high-ranking officials to control the narrative and limit site access ensued in the weeks following the Soviet loss. With little authority to probe unusual occurrences, recovery crews were directed to concentrate solely on routine equipment retrieval and remains. In order to prevent troops from entering certain areas of the terrain that were designated off-limits, comprehensive surveys had to be postponed. Intercepted and confiscated were reports that did not conform to approved reasons, and field investigators who recorded anomalies were transferred without justification. In an attempt to recoup losses and remove any evidence that may cast doubt on the official narrative, the command's reaction was rapid and methodical. When they returned, the 44th Rifle Division's survivors, the ones who managed to escape the encirclement, were subjected to lengthy debriefings. Though common during times of conflict, the events that transpired caused alarm even among military leaders. Their identities were discreetly scrubbed from documents, and their testimonies were never made public. The majority of these troops were never transferred or restored to service. Some have hypothesized that those who managed to escape the collapse had seen something crucial that the authorities needed them to keep quiet about. The mystery surrounding their disappearance was further thickened by the lack of openness, which might have been administrative or intentional. Blaming harsh winter weather, overworked logistics, and the competent Finnish opposition, the Soviet administration presented a watered-down account of the battle's conclusion in public. Convenient explanations that disregarded the more perplexing aspects of the battlefield, like as sabotage by foreign agents or defection under intense duress, were cited in certain records. Official accounts omitted any mention of odd injuries, widespread psychological breakdowns, or bodies that went missing. The unified messaging portrayed the defeat as terrible, but within the confines of traditional combat, which suited both home propaganda and international optics. Later disclosed internal papers, however, cast doubt on the veracity of the official Soviet narrative. The terms anomalous battlefield conditions and non-standard casualties were either deleted or left ambiguous in certain documents. This was not a defeat, one senior general's report mysteriously said. Additional scribbles suggested unidentified energy fields, cognitive interference, and mysterious impacts on the battlefield. The lack of conclusions in these documents, however, betrays the High Command's underlying doubts. The earth under Rate Road continued to conceal mysteries long after the final shot had ceased, and something had only just started to move. Early in 2024, a diverse team went back to Rate Road to re-evaluate it with tools that earlier researchers couldn't have used. With the help of private scientific organizations and the Finnish Ministry of Culture, the team used electromagnetic sensors, ground-penetrating radar, and high-resolution satellite images to create a map of the landscape with never-before-seen levels of accuracy. Subterranean abnormalities such as energy distortions, geometric gaps, and strangely constant magnetic fields emerged almost instantly. The focus of these readings was on the location that had previously served as the Soviet command post during the 1940 campaign. Digging continued, and the crew kept finding things that didn't make sense from a geological perspective. Layered just below the frost line were patches of vitrified sand, which typically only forms under extremely concentrated heat. The rocks, which were not magnetic to begin with, were arranged in an uneven pattern around the site of the old camp, and had weak magnetic charges. The most remarkable find was an embedded metal shard that was still weakly vibrating from inside. Despite being in an environment with temperatures below freezing, the item felt warm to the touch and shown no indications of surface rust or other age-related damage. According to some scholars, this piece was right in the middle of whatever halted the Soviet advance. After some time had passed, an orb with a diameter of 3 feet was unearthed from beneath the compressed ice and dirt. Faint energy bands around it, and its surface carried weird characters that looked like stylized Cyrillic. The orb could not be dated using conventional carbon or metallurgical tests, since its design and composition were unknown to all known Soviet technology. A working notion that the 44th Division had not lost a war, but had been disabled within a phantom resonance field was put out by certain researchers who believed that the orb's electromagnetic pulses or low-frequency vibrations interfered with human brain functioning. No one else feels the same way if reading this narrative makes you wonder more than it answers. Leave a comment with your theories. What do you believe transpired in those frigid woods? In order to ensure that you never miss an upload, subscribe to our channel for more long-lost secrets and give the video a thumbs up. Also, go ahead and click the video that's next to this one if you're up for another spine-tingling story.